Press Connect is a coffee house for women of all ages and stages. Remember to join us tonight in the theatre from 6:30 to 8:30, where multi-award-winning Yvonne St. Germain will be sharing her story and her music with us. Remember to bring your favorite dish, as it's our Christmas potluck. Hope to see you all there.
New Year's Eve is happening on a Sunday this year, and yes, we will still be having our morning services at 9:30 and 11 o'clock. So before you head out to party, come join us at Lakeview.
Over the last couple of weeks, we have been in a new teaching series entitled Barn Find, Discovering the Good News in Unexpected Places. And we've talked about it in terms of the Christmas story, not being the sappy or syrupy or sweet TV special kind of story, but a Christmas story that actually has teeth. We've talked about the Christmas story in terms of a fight the power kind of story, and how the first Christians would even speak in code to help overthrow and undermine the rule of the evil empire that they found themselves in. We've talked about the Christmas story in terms of lost and found, how the church helps dig up God's intentions for this world, pulls the best part of who we are in history and tries to slam it into every present moment. Last week in particular, we talked about girl power. Lots of ladies have talked to me after that saying, hooray, yeah, some claps there. Of course, girl power. Why? Because God created women to lead. And if we track the history of the church from the beginning to now, you know who's helping lead the charge? It's the ladies, the ladies, the ladies. And it's not only part of our past, but it's also part of our future. So then this morning, what does that lead us up to? That leads us up to directly the 2002 film The Minority Report, starring Tom Cruise and all his Oprah couch-jumping glory. You remember, right? A little crazy. If you don't remember the movie, the premise of the film was this. There's a special police unit known as the Pre-Crime Division. And with the help of the precogs, some psychics, they are able to obtain this foreknowledge of crimes that had yet to be committed. So it was their job, this tactical unit, to go out and apprehend people, arrest them before they actually commit the crimes, and in some cases, to nab them even before the idea of committing the crime had popped into their heads. Now, that movie is set in this faraway time of 2054, but in reality, the practice of apprehending future troublemakers has already been around for a long, long time. And the fancy term we use to describe that is predictive bias. You know what happened in the past, so that helps you decide what to do in the future. And I want to look at a few examples from the world of artificial intelligence this morning, but before we do that, I want to simplify it a little bit and talk about it in terms of like puppies or croissants. What are we looking at here? Which is it? Is it a dog or is it a croissant? One of these things tastes fantastic with a warm pat of butter, and one of these things warms your heart as it soils the carpets in your home. Now, they both kind of sort of look the same, right? But they're not the same. And what we've tried to do as humans is teach machines to know the difference between things that seem similar, and then teach them what to do with the knowledge that they've collected, so that a machine can make a reasonable prediction about what's going to come in the future based on the past that it knows. And we're already using technology like this with things like dating apps, right? Some of you people have been hooked up and married thanks to the World Wide Web, because you put all your details into a profile, and then your significant other put all their details into the file, and the computer went, oh, he's a croissant. She's a warm pat of butter. They belong together. And now you're living happily ever after. We've used the same technology In health circles, right? We've taught machines to recognize things like tumors. Every time you see that shape, every time you see something acting in that way, that's a tumor. And we want you to tell us every time when you see something like that. Many of us have this technology already in our pockets. Your phones do it if you've enabled predictive texting. So if you text the word Eiffel, or you type it out, your phone is likely going to predict the next word as being tower, right? If you type happy, one of your next options is going to be birthday. However, if you type the word nurse, one of the next options might be she. And if you type the word pilot, one of the next options might be he. But you and I both know, even if machines don't, that not every nurse is female and not every pilot is a male, but based on the data that we have fed the machines, based on our past, that is the prediction that it's made. So then, where does information like that come from? Think of it with this other example. The city of Boston started using this really cool app to identify where the potholes were in its city. So this is what you would do. You would load the app up on your phone, you would put it on the passenger seat beside you, and every time there was a bump, the accelerometer in your phone would recognize that and send that signal to City Hall and say, hey, at this street and this street, there's a pothole, send someone to fix it. Imagine if they used that app here in Saskatoon. They would make $1 jillion. Tons of money to be made. But what happened? This led to potholes only being repaired in wealthier neighborhoods. Well, that's weird. Why the bias? Well, later they discovered this, that it's only a certain kind of person that drives themselves to work, or maybe drives themselves alone to work and puts their phone in the empty passenger seat. And they probably have a brand new phone that's able to take up this brand new app, and they probably have an unlimited data plan that they can use freely. Meanwhile, there's other people who have older phones that might not be able to take this app, and they might not have an unlimited data plan, and they might be taking the bus, not the car all by themselves, or maybe they might be working on their phone or doing something else so that they can't run this app in the background. So the data that this program collected was true, but at the same time, it was biased. So what happens when we've got a pothole bias, and how do we relate that to a people bias? Maybe you heard this story, that on a spring afternoon in 2014, Brisha Borden was running late to pick up her god sister from school, and when she spotted an unlocked kid's blue Huffy bicycle and a silver Razor scooter, Borden and her friend grabbed the bike and the scooter and tried to ride them down the street in the Fort Lauderdale suburb of Coral Springs. Just as the 18-year-old girls were realizing that they were too big for the tiny conveyances, which belonged to a 6-year-old boy, a woman came running after them saying, hey, that's my kid's stuff. And Borden and her friend immediately dropped the bike and scooter and walked away. But it was too late. A neighbor who witnessed the heist had already called the police. Borden and her friend were arrested and charged with burglary and petty theft for items which were valued at a total of $80. Now compare their crime to a similar one. The previous summer, 41-year-old Vernon Prater was picked up for shoplifting $86.35 worth of tools from a nearby Home Depot store. Prater was the more seasoned criminal. He had already been convicted of armed robbery and attempted armed robbery, for which he served 5 years in prison, in addition to another armed robbery charge. Borden had a record too, but it was for misdemeanors committed when she was a juvenile. Yet something odd happened when Borden and Prater were booked into jail. A computer program spat out a score predicting the likelihood of each committing a future crime. Now, what do you think the computer decided? Based on what it knew about both people who had roughly committed the same crime in roughly the same neighborhood, and one had served jail time and one had not. That wasn't all the data. There was one more piece of data used that the computer used to factor in. Borden, who was black, was rated a high risk. Prater, who was white, was rated a low risk. 2 years later, we know the computer algorithm got it exactly backward. Borden has not been charged with any new crimes. Prater is serving an 8-year prison term for subsequently breaking into a warehouse and stealing thousands of dollars worth of electronics. So then, we're teaching machines to predict the future based on a past or a version of the past that we have informed them of. Now, we want machines to tell us when they see a tumor every single time they see a tumor. We want machines to help us to find a mate online. We want machines not to assume that every nurse is female or every pilot is a male. And we want machines to tell us that potholes exist in more than just wealthier neighborhoods. We want machines also to realize that, you know what? Someone isn't of a higher or lower risk of offending just because of this color of their skin. So with all that in mind, you might be wondering, well, what does any of that have to do with Christmas? I think it's this, that the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up and took the child to his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where they stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. And when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Now, this is part of the Christmas story that doesn't end up on anyone's nativity scene on the front lawn or on the coffee table. Of course not. Why not? Because it's a horrific story. And some of you might be wondering, well, why are you even telling this horrific story? Like on this day, we just had kids on the stage. Well, that's exactly why I'm telling it. I want you to see a connection. A connection that if we don't see it, that we might run the risk of repeating a similar massacre. Think of it like this, that based on the data that Herod had received, and based on his bias, the birth of Jesus was a future threat. So in a minority report, machine bias kind of way, he was going to neutralize the threat and kill the king who could potentially take his place even before any of that could materialize. Because Herod couldn't be the ruler if Jesus was going to be the ruler. Now, who is Herod? We've talked about him before, but here's the quick refresher. Herod is middle management. He's half Jewish. He's put in place by the Roman Empire to look after this particular region, and that particular region is the region where Jesus was born. But Caesar Augustus, the emperor in charge at the time, bestowed Herod with a very special title. Do you know what that title was? It was King of the Jews. Which makes it super awkward when the gospel writers are saying that Jesus, this child, is actually the king of the Jews. Now, Herod is a real piece of work. The dude had 10 wives, and his favorite wife, he made this rule, that if he should die, that she gets to be put to death right away. Why? Because he didn't want anybody else to have her, and he didn't want her to enjoy life without him. Later, he actually put her to death because he thought she was seeing someone else, which she wasn't. He actually put 3 of his own sons to death because he was worried that they might overthrow him. He was a huge suck-up to Rome, building temples and monuments, putting up placards and posters about how amazing and great Rome was. He would go into defenseless countrysides and he would ransack them for their supplies. He enacted this police state, and then beyond that, what he did was collect 40 or 50 of the most prominent, important men in that region. He throws them all into jail, and he leaves this rule that if he should die, all these men should be executed. Why? Because he wants there to be crying, weeping, and mourning in the region when he dies, because he is worried that no one will cry for him. So now again, you might be wondering, well, what does any of that have to do with Christmas? Let's just go back quickly to this idea of machine bias. Here's a couple of lines from a brilliant podcast I listened to on the subject. Check it out. Make the connection. That machines have the power to create the world they predicted. The algorithm that gets it most right gets to live on in the next round because machine learning software writes the next version of itself. Do you see the connection now? Herod is terrified by the Christ child. Why? Because he's functioning under this old program, this broken algorithm, this Roman one that says if someone gets in your way, you kill them. It's a sick operating system designed only for self-gain and self-preservation, and anyone who is against you, anyone who is a threat must be eliminated. And if you think about it hard enough, you'll realize that there are people in this world who are still living, still writing that program into the next version of themselves. But for you and I, writing that next version of ourselves, meaning our kids, might be one of the most important things we have to do on this planet. Whether it's our flesh and blood kids, or the children that we're supporting through foster families here in Saskatoon, or the children we are supporting in Zambia. Right now, you and I are writing the future version, the next version of ourselves. So then to all the parents who are in the room here today, both present and future, part of the Christmas story is a reminder to you as a parent that you have the power to create the future through your kids. And you can program them with that old dusty operating system that you inherited with all its flaws and all its biases. Or you could write that next version of yourself in such a way that helps shape the future, shape the world a little more like heaven on earth. Or just a little bit more like God's original intention for all of us. Or maybe a little bit more like God's end game of healing and restoring everything. Because you know what? If we don't, then Herod's massacre repeats itself yet again. Why? Because when we end up damaging and hurting kids, those hurting kids grow up to be hurting adults. And what do hurt people do? Hurt people hurt people. So for all of us, parents or not, for those of us who are here this morning who feel like the massacre is already underway, for those of us who feel like this world is already a mess and Christmas actually only makes it worse, for those of us who feel like it's impossible or maybe even pointless to hang on to faith in a world that seems to be run on evil, the Christmas story for you and I this morning, what it does is actually it steadies us. It steadies us with this reminder. Rewrite the script. Rewrite the code. Wherever it is in your power, the response to pain and tragedy and evil is to write the future in sequence with God's dreams for this world. And where does it start? It starts with our kids, both here in our homes and in our city and in our world. So friends, remember that the Christian response to trouble is to reset the program, no matter how many times it's been corrupted or abused. Your response every single time you get knocked down is to get up. Get up if you've been knocked down. Why? For the sake of the kids and for the sake of this world that God loves so much. Friends, that is part of our Christmas story.